Welcome to the Elokus channel. This is class number 2 in the fourth discourse of the great book B'Shasha Ekdimu. This discourse is called Naso as Rosh, and this is class number 2. And we are holding in the overall discourse in chapter 12. This is going to be the second class in chapter 12. Okay, so the theme and the idea that we are in the midst of, and where he's going to now take us is he's going to take us away from the idea which we had kind of understood earlier, that we know that the sphirot, the attributes, are made up of both lights and vessels, and we were under the assumption that the character and definitions and limitations that can apply to the sphirot, to the attributes, is only applicable to the vessels, but the lights are completely undefined, and as a result of that, and utterly simple, which would make them limitless, because once you have a certain definition, that is already a limitation. But because the lights are just a pure force without any definitions to it, without any design to it, and the reason we said that is because Atzilus is called Atzilus. Atzilus means just an emanation of the Ein Sof, which means the Ein Sof coming into expression. And if the Ein Sof is coming to expression, it means there's nothing new being created. And being that we're on the impression that in the Ein Sof there can't be any definitions and design and description in the Ein Sof, even in a very hidden way. For that reason, we are then compelled to say that there's a certain part of the spheros, at least, that are just a revelation of Ein Sof without any definition and limitation, because the Ein Sof is definitely b'li gevul meaning without a limit. So if this is an expression and revelation of the Ein Sof, in other words, it's not a Ein Aroch, it's not something completely different. It's not a Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing, where there's already a something compared to earlier where it's nothing, which we said is also true about Atzilus, about the Sphirot, about the attribute. But in order to resolve the conflict, in order to resolve the contradiction, we chose the path initially to resolve it very simply, that the vessels are something new and they are inconsequential to the source, but the lights are just a continuation of the Ein Sof. That would have to mean that the lights have no definition whatsoever and utterly limitless. What he's going to do now is he's going to refute that idea. Okay, that's where we started over here, and the reason this basis for the negation of what we learned in the previous chapter, for negating this particular concept, that the lights are pashut, are utterly pashut, utterly simple, and therefore b'li gevul and limitless. His negation of that is because when it says ve'achachma me'ayin timatze, that chachma stems from ayin, implying that wisdom, which is the first of the 10 sefirot, is something new, and it comes from nothingness, which means its origins have no relationship to it. It's not like an evolution of what was. It's an utterly new entity. We were satisfied in last chapter to apply that's true. That's the vessels. That's the kelim of chachma, the vessels of chachma. Chachma, wisdom, is also a design. But what he's rejecting now is the statement v'chachma me'ayin timatzi seems to imply to the entire spectrum of chachma, to the entire sphere of chachma, both the keli and the oir. The light as well is part of the sphere of chachma, oir hachachma, the light of chachma. And on that as well, we apply the idea that it is v'chachma me'ayin timatzi, that it's something new. So therefore, he's going to, based on that, he's going to change the whole dynamic over here, and he's going to explain that albeit that compared to the vessels, we look at the energies, the lights that are in the vessels as definitionless, and we look at the lights as limitless and pashut and simple. However, that's of course only compared to the vessels. But compared to the true Or Ein Sof, the infinite one, let's say the light of the Kav, or definitely the Or Ein Sof that's before the Tzimtzum, of course, the Oiros of Atzilus have already a certain leaning inside of them. They're already bent in a certain direction, if we might say. They have already a certain somethingness to it. Although hardly what you can call a description, but yet there is already something as he's going to develop. So the first proof was, let's read it again, just the last line. That also the lights of the 10 spheres, the lights, not the vessels, that come from the kav, come from the thread. The thread is that, like the thread of Ein Sof that passed the tzimtzum, which, as we spoke before, is the mother of the oiros, right? She gives birth to the lights, but she's the light of all lights. Ein Ratzaloim Hashem Pshutim Legamri. We will. When we said that they're simple, does not mean that they're utterly simple, which means they don't have even the slightest bit of design to them. Kamoi Pshitas or Ein Sof, like the same level of simplicity, the same level of non-definition, like the Ein Sof, like the Or Ein Sof, Mamish. Shahare, what's his proof? It says in the book of formation, when it speaks about the 10 spheros, it refers to them as 10 spherot, 10 attributes, without a substance. Which means that, on the one hand, they're spherot, they're attributes, but you can't really say they're something. They're still so nothing, they're so undefined. So where is he proving it from? The fact that to the Eser Sfirot, we say that they are Eser Sfirot, they're 10 attributes. The notion that they're 10 is already implying that there is a difference between them. If they would be exactly the same, then how would they be 10? It's all the same light. What would make them 10? So therefore, we have to say that there is already some difference between one light and the other light. Now, you can challenge this immediately, and he doesn't address it over here and say, well, maybe when the Sefer Yetzirah says Eser Spheros Belima, it's referring to the spheros when they're embodied in the vessels. When the oil is inside the vessel, so because of the vessel, and the vessel for sure, the vessels are for sure different one from the other. The vessels are characterized. Chesed, which is kindness, is one thing, and rachamim, which is or teferes, which is compassion, is a different flavor, or netzach, or the like. They're all different. So we would say that why can't we blame it on the kelim? Yes, of course, Sefer Yetzirah says there are 10, but that's not because of the light. The light is equal and even in all of them. However, the reason we can't say that is because the Sefer Yetzirah must be talking about the spheros prior to their vessels. Why? Because once they're in the vessels cannot be called belima without a substance, because the vessels definitely have a substance. It's already bimitzios. We learned it in earlier. The kalim are bimitzios. He said they're not a yesh, means they're not a somebody, but they're still a something, meaning there's still some definition to them. So we can't say on it belima without any substance. If we're saying it's without any substance, we must be talking about the spheros when they're very, 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 when they're not a thing yet. What is that? That is the oir. The oir is not a thing. The oiros, the lights, are enough abstract, if we might say, enough undefined that they're not called a thing. Yet, what are we saying? They're 10. Which means that somehow we have to squeeze in this. We have to split hairs over here. We have to, on the one hand, appreciate that they're still not a thing, and they're still pre-thing, so they're undefined. That we should be able to look to say that this is this or this is that. But at the same time, the fact that they're 10 must mean that there is already slight variation on the level of energy as well. Haregam kamoishem belima. That's his emphasis. Even when they're in a state of belima, which means in a state of pure light, when they're still in a state of belima, hareyem bebchenas eses spheres al kapanim. They are still at least in a state of 10 spheres. Now, to further prove this idea, he's going to show us clearly from Kabbalah, from different statements made by the great Kabbalists, that it's possible to speak about differentiation of sphirot, of attributes, where there is only lights and there's no vessels. In other words, we cannot argue that what makes sphirot, the attributes are only the vessels. Because then on a level where the vessels don't exist, we're soon going to see there are levels where there's only energy and there's no vessels. These bodiless energies, state of existence before vessels come into being. And yet, the Kabbalists identify sphirot, attributes. So we have to say that there is attributes even in the level of Or, even without vessels. In Matzinu, when we find Esses spheres, Ba'oires Gamke, we find that there's 10 spheres in lights. Kamoi Esses spheres the Atik. Like the 10 spheros in Kabbalah, it mentions that in the level of Atik, which means the ancient one, the ancient of days, in that level there are 10 spherot. Like, for example, it's explained in many places that, let's say, I'm teaching now a Mashiach Maayor from the Rebbe of Achron Shel Pesach, from the last day of Passover, where the Rebbe talks about the splitting of the sea of the future is going to be, the splitting of the river that's going to be the days of Mashiach is going to be in 7 passageways. Because we're going to access the 7 lower sphirot, the 7 lower attributes of Atik Yom and of the Ancient of Days. So each one is another pathway into another one of these attributes. Each of the trails that are opened up in the river of the future, of the river that we're going to cross in the future. But not on the first 3. But the first 3 are closed. We're not. That's not possible to know. It's not possible to access it. So you see clearly that in Atik Yomin, in the Ancient of Days, we also talk about attributes, spheres. So what? And we know that Atik Yomin is still a level beyond vessels. I'm going to go back to explain in a minute what does he mean with Atik Yomin. We'll get that in a moment. But let's just first see the outline. V'rei Atik, and behold, in Atik, in the level of Atik, which is in the level of the ancient of days, lo yesh adayim b'chinas hakelim. That's still a pre-vessel state. There is no vessels on that lofty level called Atik Yomin. And if there are sphirot over there, if there are attributes, so we have to say that the attributes are detectable even in Atik Yomin, which means they're differentiatable. And if they're differentiatable, means that they have already somewhat of a design, or else what would make them different? If they would be pashut, if they would be simple like the Orein Sof himself, then you couldn't speak of attributes. You couldn't mention any attributes. It's just one simple light. The fact that in Atik Yomin, although it's all that we have is oir, we have lights, we don't have any vessels yet, and yet we mention 10 spheros, so that's a proof that even in the lights themselves there is sphera, there is attribute, there is spheros, which means there is already design. Now, from the level of Keser, from the level of Atik, which is, by the way, the innermost of the Keser of the crown. We're going to get to that in a moment. From this, that in Atik Yomin, which is the highest level of the crown, in that level we see there is spheros, which proves that the sphirot, the attributes, apply to the light even without the vessels. Then we will then take this down, that even in a place where there are vessels, which is in Atzilus, which is much lower, where over there already there is room for vessels to exist, we will have to acknowledge that the design, the character, the characterization of the differences between one sphere and the other sphere although it's primarily applicable to the vessels, but it also is applicable to the lights. Because the lights of Atzilus are not higher than the lights of Atik Yomin. And if the lights of Atik Yomin are already divided in Sfirot, then the lights of Atzilus, which are already vesselable, as we're going to see, they're kalable, they can go into kalim, of course, which means they're thicker, they're denser, they're more graspable, they're in a much more limited state. Of course, in them, there is already a notion of definition, a notion of spheres. So let's stop for a moment and give a little bit something on Atik Yomin. So we know, I don't know if I teach, Baruch Hashem, we teach so much Chassidus here, and I don't always remember if, in which class we discussed which concept. So it's possible that in the Yelakus podcast, we've already spoken a little bit about Atik. I think we did, because I think he mentioned that in the Keser, right in the beginning of the discourse, in the first Maamor, he mentioned that Keser is a memutza. Keser acts as a medium between the Or Ein Sof and Atzilus and the worlds, and the world of Atzilus, and we learned that every medium, if you remember, every medium or every mediator needs to contain within himself features, or it needs to relate to both parties that it is mediating. So if Keser is mediating between the Or Ein Sof, the complete Or Ein Sof, and Atzilus, which is definable Sfirot, attributes, already limited expressions of the divine. So Keser has to have within itself one side of it that is utterly limitless, and the other side of it that's the source of limitation. So in general, Keser is still Ein Sof. Atzilus is where we begin already with Sfirot, with attributes, with some kind of a measure, midos. The spheres are measured, they're limited. Keser in general is Ein Sof. However, there is the side of Keser that's facing Atzilus, which means the element of Keser, where Keser is being a source for Atzilus, it's at least a source for Sfirot and attributes. And that level of Keser is called Erech Anpin, the long face. And it's interesting, with the word Erech Anpin, it says it all. The fact that it's referring to it as a face implies that there is already design over there. It relates to design. Why? What does the face have to do with design? Every face has a design. It's a face. The face is this. What distinguishes? How do you know one person from the other person? It's all the facial features. There's no two people that are exactly the same. The face says is the individualization of a person is primarily in their face. But in particularly, it's not just that. The characterization and the personalization, if you might say, that God takes on a certain personality and a certain character, which is expressed in the 10 Sfirot. The 10 Sfirot are the divine being, in which, what image does God take on? He takes on the image of a human. That's why we're created in the image of God, the human being. So the Sfirot are in an image of a man, Adam. That's why it's when the prophets beheld the divine, when they beheld God, they saw the chariot, and then on the chariot they saw an image like a person, like an Adam. So the 10 Spheros, and what is that? What's that image? Those are the 10 attributes. Because they're the three intellectual attributes, Chachma, Bina, Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, comprise the head of God. And then the emotional attributes, the latter 7, comprise the rest of the body. The 2 arms, the torso, the legs, and so on and so forth. As we know from Kabbalah, right? So that's Adam. Over there, God is called Adam. In Keser, on the level of crown, which is still beyond Sfirot. In general, on that level, we say Kiloi Adamu. God is not a man. Because God has no definitions. He's infinite. He's beyond all these Sfirot attributes. Yet, in that very, very level of Kiloi Adam, where God is not a man, he's a source. At least the lower part of Keser is a source to being a man. And that's why the lower part of Keser, one that's facing Atzilus, is called Erech Anpin, the long face. Meaning, as opposed to the Sfirot of Atzilus, the attributes of Atzilus that's already in human form, is called Ze'er Anpin, the small face. In Aramaic, Ze'er means small. Over here, to contrast that, we say, on the one hand, Keser is also called a face, but it's called a long face. Long over here means infinite. So what kind of face can it be if it's infinite, and infinite means beyond definition? So that's always the challenge of being able to understand that Keser is not yet a sphera. There's no attributes there, but there is a will. Like we discussed earlier in the Maayor, there is a desire. God desires that there should be kindness. So if he's desiring kindness, is that already putting some kind of a image on him? Yes, in as much as the desire is kindness and not something else. So that element in his desire, in his pure infinite desire, where he wants kindness, that is tainted, so to speak, by kindness. But it's not kindness, it's only a desire for kindness. So you see how that's why it's still limitless, it's long, it's not defined. But it's already the subtlety, it's already the beginning, the possibility of kalim, of vessels, is already starting. And the same as all the other features. So it's, on the one hand, a panim, it's a face. Erech anpin, anpin means face, like the Aramaic word for face. But it's erech, it's long. That's the lower part of Keser. That's, remember we said, a mediator needs to mediate between two parties, between them. The higher part of Keser is where Keser is receiving from the Or Ein Sof. On that level, there is no face, no face. And that's why it's not called with any face. And it's the name that we refer to it is actually emphasizes the opposite of a face. Because it's called Atik Yomin. Atik Yomin means removed from days. Now, days and face, the same idea. Every day is because since Hashem created the world in 7 days, each day was a different attribute. So days are related to a particularized revelation. So when we say he is ancient from days, means he precedes days. In him there are no days. He's above days. He's pre-days, pre-face. So Atik Yomen is Keser, the level of Keser. But the level of Keser that it is receiving from the Or Ein Sof, and therefore it itself is still Ein Sof. Okay? Now, obviously on this level there is no Kalim. There is no vessels. Because that's the whole point. It's removed from vessels. It's a representation. It's capturing the Ein Sof. That is Ein Sof. That's Bli Gevul. That's without limitation. Yet we find that the Kabbalists speak that in Atik Yomen there are Sfirot. There are attributes. Now, if this stuff is not going to give you a headache, right? Yesterday we fasted Yom Kippur. Right? I hope you didn't. We're going to have to keep on going and climbing. And so Hashem should help no one should have a headache. But you understand what we're talking over here. So in Atik Yomen, we're saying there is no definitions. It's removed from all days, but yet at the same time, we speak of spheres. So that's what he's proving. So therefore, you have to say that even in a level where there is no kalim, because it's removed from days, it's removed from any sort of vessel, yet even in Atik Yomen, there is spheres, there are attributes. So therefore, we can identify already attributes. We have to say that even in a place where there is only light and there's no kalim, there is already attributes. So you have to say, if it's attribute, and there's 10, And if there's 10 attributes, it must be that they're different one from the other. So all that we're saying now is we cannot say that there is something there, but we cannot either say that it is as simple as the Or Ein Sof himself. Because in the Or Ein Sof, there is no spheres. Here there is spheres. Okay. Hold on. We also find Gam Kain, Essa spheres, but it is Gam Kain, Kamoi Essa spheres, the Atik, like the 10 spheres of Atik Yoimen. Vahare Ba'atik, and in Atik, in the level of ancient, Lo Yesh Adayim B'chenas HaKelim, there are no Kelim. Ikke Yedu, as it is known Be'inyan Ve'ein Elokim Imadi. There is a pasuk that says, that God says in Parshas Azinu, we just read it. I think it's Ru'u Atoki Ani Hu Ve'ein Elokim Imadi. Take a look, God says. This is going to be revealed when God takes revenge on all those who oppress the Jewish people. This is literally timely. This is what's beginning to happen now. God is, by the way, just for those who need a little chizuk over here, God is about to explode his wrath on the evil. There's no question, based on everything we learned on Hazinu and based on what it says in all of the prophets, in the end of days, when God has had it. So that's where we're holding right now. It started already a little bit before, and we hope that we get to see it quickly and fast, and with Iran and all those what we call choleres, that we see it really quickly. In any case, but over there it's God says, you will then see Ani who I am, the Ein Elokim Imadi, and there's no Elokim with me. Simply means there's no other God with me. But the deeper meaning is that there's no force of Elokim. Elokim is vessels. In other words, what Hashem is saying, that this action, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to destroy the evil in the world, is going to be from the level of Atik Yom, and from the level of the ancient himself. And over there's no Elokim. And from here is where he derives the idea that in Atik Yom there are no Kelim. Because that's the way it's explained in Kabbalah. What does it mean? Because Elokim is the source of vessels. Havaya is the name of God associated with the lights. And Elokim is associated with vessels. We know in our own bodies, our soul comes from Havaya, and our body comes from Elokim. And that's the way it is down here, so it is in all levels. Wherever there is oiros, the lights are connected to Havaya, and we know Elokim is the name of tzimtzum, of contraction. So the vessels are always associated with the name of Elokim. So as it says, that Elokim is not with me, Atik Yomin Itmar, which the Zohar says is referring, indicative of Atik Yomin, the Elokim hu b'chenas hakelim, Elokim, the name Elokim is associated with vessels, uba Atik Yomin, and in Atik Yomin, ve'ein Elokim imadi, with me on that level there is no kelim, there are no vessels, it's pure oil. And yet we say, let's not lose the thought. And yet we say that in Atik Yomin there are spheroids. So this is another proof that there is already somewhat of a design on the most subtlest of levels, in a level of light, even though there's no kelim. And obviously we can apply the same thing to Atzilus. V'yashloima, we can say the mashe ba'atik lo yesh b'chenas hakelim. And this that we say, that in Atik there is no kelim, there's no vessels. Hainu shalo yesham inyan hakelim klal. That in Atik the whole concept of kelim doesn't exist. Ein Elokim imadi means an utter refutation of vessels. In other words, we might say, like we're always saying on every level, you're going to go there in this level, you're not going to see the vessels, because they're so overwhelmed by the light. Remember we spoke about that? We're going to bring that in a moment, that in Adom Kadmon, there is really letters, but there's Kalim over there, but because the light is so bright, the brilliance of the light doesn't allow you to see the letters, but they're really there. And if you would only dim the light, you would see the vessels. So we might say that in Atik Yom, and it's when we say there's no vessels, means that they're just not noticed. They're not b'pchenas metzios. They're not in a state of something. So the Rebbe is arguing. He's saying, no. In Atik Yomin, the idea is it's a level where there is only oil and there's no light, even not in a subtle state. Lo yeshin hakelim klal, lo rak heder hametzios shel hakelim. Not just the substantialness of the vessels, which are in Atzilus, where the vessels are already, of substance, that they have already a noticeable presence. But in Atik, there's no Kalim at all. And since in Atik there is no Kalim in all, and yet there are Spherois there, we have to say that the Spherois relate even just to the light. He's going to challenge this, we're going to see it in the next class. This last thought that he just said, that in Atik Yomen there isn't any source, there isn't any Kalim at all. It's just pure light. It's soul without any body. He's going to challenge it because Adam Kadmon is higher than Atik, and yet in Adam Kadmon there is Kalim. How can it be that in Atik Yomen, which is the highest point of Keser, there is no Kalim? When Adam comes, okay, so we're going to leave that Be'ezus Hashem. I hope you can all sleep and you shouldn't disturb your sleep tonight until we get to learn the next class. But Be'ezus Hashem, we're going to resolve this as well. Okay. Meanwhile, let Mashiach be revealed today.